Alright, we're here with Jeepy again. Jeepy is a 1994 Jeep Cherokee Sport with a 4.0 liter engine in it. The 4.0 is an inline 6. And this is overheating again. And we've troubleshot it to a freeze plug at the very end of the head that has a breach in it, and because of that, water's escaping through the corrosion in the freeze plug. Alright, the freeze plug that corroded on this is at the very back of the head, so it's very difficult to get to, and there's a bunch of reasons why that could have corroded. The coolant has rust preventative properties on it, and if you don't have coolant in your system and you're just circulating water, well, that's going to cause rust in there. I've used the cooling system flush before. I mean, that's designed to eat away at rust and corrosion buildup in the engine. I imagine that could also affect a freeze plug if some of it was remaining in the void area back there where that freeze plug fits into the head. I don't know, maybe it's just a bad freeze plug we got with the head rebuild. But anyway, we're gonna have to take a look at this and see if we can remove it. And they make a temporary freeze plug that you can insert in there. It's a plug. You tighten a bolt, and that expands and fills that freeze plug opening. But that would be a temporary fix. My goal is to fix this to keep it in service as long as possible. But we'll look through my stuff and see what I have, and then I'm going to make a decision on it. Alright, who knows what we're going to find in here. There's a freeze plug. I thought I had some temporary freeze plugs in here. There's a marble. Alright, they make temporary freeze plug replacements. Thought I had a couple in here. I actually have bought engines with cracked blocks to get parts from them, so I didn't save anything though. Alright. Okay, I've spent enough time looking for temporary freeze plugs. If we open this up and make a determination that it's going to be easy to pop that freeze plug out, I mean, that's a quick fix. Reach in there and with a wrench, minimum clearance, we can tighten that down and this thing's operational again. But that's just a temp fix. I mean, I've seen guys ride around with those in there for the life of the vehicle, but I want to fix this right. So we'll open this up, pull the valve cover off And see how much clearance we got with that removed. That's about 4 inches in height. All right, we're gonna pull the valve cover. When the valve cover bolts come out, some of them have a little stud on the top. So we want to get these into the same position. Okay, these bolts are all number 11 metric. And the first observation I'm making here is that a lot of these are just finger tight on here. This doesn't make sense. There's 3. That one's tight. That one's finger tight. So the valve cover gasket most likely has shrunk up over time. That would be my first guess on this. It's doubtful that all of these have vibrated loose. So we will inspect that gasket when we get it off. Boy, these are all loose. 1 or 2 still have a good torque on them. Okay, those bolts were all loose, except maybe 1 or 2 of them. Now see this little template I made? Now I'll know where the stud features go. So when you're torquing, there's a couple of things to take into consideration. One is the running torque, and that's the drag or friction you have between the threads and the material it's threading into. With a running torque, you just add that to the total torque. But the other thing is a gasket that's going to compress as you torque it. So you torque it down and then it compresses. Well, that torque you just torqued it to changes. So this engine was rebuilt 5 years ago. And all these bolts are basically just finger tight now. So when we pull this valve cover, we'll inspect the gasket. My suspicion is its thickness is probably, over time in this engine heat, the thickness of it has decreased to the point where these bolts are all loose. Okay, one other thing let's discuss. All this stuff on a 30-year-old Jeep is plastic and brittle. So be careful taking it apart. And keep in mind that it's plastic and brittle after 30 years. And if you can leave things together and separate it at a place where you won't damage it, do that, because this stuff's all junkyard item at this point. All right, here's my first example of what I'm talking about. These two are plastic. Those are throttle cables. And one's a cable that goes to the transmission to tell what position it should be in. Now the bracket holding these is a number 10. And I'm gonna use that bracket as my disconnect point. There's a number 10 bolt there, and there's another one somewhere else. We'll find it. Okay, it would be very time consuming to replace these cables, so we're not even gonna risk breaking these pieces of plastic in here. See that? Now that thing will just move out of the way like that. This one already has been broke, it looks like, and that's a battlefield repair right there. And most likely that's the same thing that happened back here. So there's another opportunity to break some plastic. Just leave those in there. And then these come in all different sizes too. So replacement is going to be time consuming. Finding them and then getting the right size. Okay, don't throw this gasket away yet. With a little RTV, you can use that as a temp gasket. I used to live in Makakilo, Hawaii, and one time I drove all the way down to Waipahu with no valve cover gaskets on a Pontiac 350. Man, I was smoking like you wouldn't believe when I pulled into Waipahu there at the auto parts store. But anyway, this is still in good enough condition. With a little loving care, we might be able to put that back on and move this car around at least. Okay, there's the breach in the freeze plug. And I don't know if I'm going to have enough room here to replace that with this in situ. Even taking these two rockers off here at the end isn't going to give me enough clearance to swing a hammer and seat that again. Alright, this is a bad break on this. But instead of fighting that for 2 or 3 days, I'm just going to pull this head off and then change that freeze plug. With it right there in front of me, I'll make sure it's seated well. Alright, we'll get going on this tomorrow. A nice frosty morning here. Alright, the first thing we're going to remove after the valve cover is the air box. With the air box out, you got plenty of room to reach under and disconnect things. Alright, there's 2 bolts and a nut in here that hold this air box to the body. 13 metric. And then this is out of your way and you got plenty of room to work. Did you see that? I have cracked this before and had to replace it pulling this air box, so be careful there. Okay, my goal with this intake manifold and the exhaust manifold that essentially fit together on the side of the head here like a puzzle piece is to leave as much things attached and just pull that away when the head comes off. Do you see this bolt right here? It goes through the mount for the power steering pump and it goes into the exhaust manifold right there. There's a good chance that this aluminum casting will crack right here if you're not careful. I know from experience. So I'm going to remove the power steering pump, but more specifically this bracket, and just get that out of there. Okay, see this with the air box removed? You got plenty of room to get your hand up under here, because that's where some of these bolts are that mount the power steering pump. I'm telling you, it threw me for a loop the very first time I tried to get that serpentine belt off, because there's one bolt that's truly hidden up under behind that stuff. Alright, the electric fan is easy to get out of your way. Two number 8 bolts and it's out of there. Electrical connector also. Okay, that's the bolt I'm talking about down there. It's hard to find. So you got 1, 2, and then 3. And then this whole thing rotates on you and you can pop the serpentine belt off. Now what I'm going to do is move that whole power steering pump out of the way, wire it, and then get this mounting bracket completely removed. This is the mechanism that tightens up the serpentine belt. It's a really great design. And then when it's tight, a bolt comes through here and holds that adjustment. I just removed that whole thing. Get that out of the way. Okay, see these two slots? One and then two. That's the one I'm talking about down here. See that? That's the one that's kind of hidden back behind there. That one, you can see it pretty good, but the one down here, you got to get in behind there. Don't forget that one. So this bracket will come off now with 1, 2, 3 bolts. Okay. See this bracket out of the way, how much room you have now to get under here and work. There's the two mounting points on the intake manifold. And it's kind of hard to pull this away from your head with this still installed, because of this bolt right here that we just took out. That's holding this against the head. So remove this bracket. A better view of that slot that I was talking about. The bolt comes through this way. Alright, it's time to pull the intake manifold and the exhaust manifold. And they kind of made up, sort of like a puzzle piece. Definitely use a 6-point on these, not a 12-point. You don't want to strip out these bolt heads. The ones holding the exhaust manifold in are subjected to quite a bit of heat. And the opportunity to damage them with a 12-point is great. We're going to separate the intake manifold and the exhaust manifold from the head. We're going to try to leave as much of the fuel feed system, the electrical stuff, definitely leave the throttle body in place. Probably have to take this rail here that's protecting the electrical wiring. This temp bulb is where you're supposed to burp the 4.0 from. But as you can see, it's way back here, and with the valve cover on here, it's very difficult to get to. We are going to remove this before we break it. Get a deep well socket on it. There's some bolts back here to the intake manifold and exhaust that are located very close to this. We don't want to have to buy another one of these if we don't have to. But if you were to burp it from there, you just loosen that up like that. Let the air get out and then tighten that back down. Alright, 5 bolts across the top, 4 bolts across the bottom, and on the ends are 2 studs with 9/16 nuts. So this intake manifold, my goal here is just to pull this back like that the exhaust doesn't want to pull back, does it? It's still connected to the exhaust pipe. Might have to remove the intake manifold completely. Okay, that'll slide off just like that. That'll be plenty of room to get this head out of here. There's the gasket. And the gasket has two studs sticking out, so you can't install this the wrong way unless you really try hard. Okay, that stud in the back that's identical to this. The exhaust manifold has to come out pretty far to get the gasket off. Instead of putting too much work into this, when the head's loose, we'll remove that old gasket and have the new one pre-installed for when we place this back on the block. So I'm also going to pull the spark plugs just so I don't break any of them. And then don't forget that ground wire back there. I've forgotten to disconnect that many a time pulling engines. All right, let's take a break. All right, time to get the push rods and the rocker arms removed. And when you take these out, it's a good maintenance practice to keep them in the same order, position, and orientation, meaning this end up, okay? These bolts are torqued to 16 to 26, so the valves are essentially non-adjustable. But each of these is a different length. Even though you can line them up and they look the same, there's going to be a variation after this has been in operation of the length. So there's going to be wear in the lifter, and there's going to be wear in this cup on the rocker. If you mix them up, one's a little bit longer, one wore a little different than the others, you're going to get fine little metal shavings, and that could lead to a failure. So I've drilled holes in a piece of 2x4 to keep them in line, and the reason I do that is because something's going to come up and I'm going to have to move this. And if you have them lined up in a beer bottle box, and you come back to it a month later, you're going to wonder if it's in the right order. So on this engine, the valves are not adjustable. It's a torque on the rocker, and there's a little fulcrum in there. So it's a little more critical on this engine to keep the push rods in the right order, orientation, and position that they come out from. Alright, when I torque these, I'm going to put it to 24. There's a range, like I said, 16 to 26, I think. But so here's a metric 13. See that? It's not a good size for this. 1/2 inch is the way to go. So this swaps back to standard on these. Alright, I think we can at least agree that that's better than a beer box. Okay, on this side of the head, we're going to pull the spark plugs, because I don't want to break any of those when we're trying to get this head out. It's very heavy. And we'll get these hoses out of the way. And then the air conditioning compressor is mounted to a bracket. We're going to have to remove that also. On second thought, I'm not going to pull these spark plugs after all, now that I got the leads off. Look, they sit in this nice little recess. Must have been a different head that I cracked the spark plug on. These look pretty safe. Those spark plugs are getting expensive, especially those Platinum Plus spark plugs. That's all there is to this compressor. Alright, this compressor has not had Freon in it for years. Okay, it's just here so the pulley setup stays the same. You can buy an idler arm that you can put in here. You can get them on Amazon. I just choose to reinstall the compressor and let it spin. Alright, there is this electrical connector to consider when you're removing this. Now that pulley that I'm talking about that you can get on Amazon, it replaces the position of this, and you're saving weight by not having it in the car. But as you can see, with the clutch disengaged, this thing freewheels with minimal drag, so you're not losing any horsepower from this spinning. The replacement blank off pulley, or the idler, whatever the proper name is, it's gonna rotate freely just like this, but there is a weight savings, so I'm gonna leave the compressor in there. Alright, with two bolts out, 1, 2 for 9/16, then I reached under with my 9/16 wrench and loosened the bolt under there. And see that? We should be able to get this head off without disassembling anything else. Okay, your head bolts are 5/8 on this. Definitely use a 12-point. And this deep well probably isn't the best tool to use for this. The torque on this is pretty high. Five-eighths. Nothing's easy. Okay, that one head bolt back there, there's not enough clearance to get that out, if I remember right. Maybe there is. We'll work on that later. We still got that stud holding the exhaust manifold back there. This is ready to come out. Okay, a couple of things did go wrong. I was leaning on the fan shroud and cracked it. So I'm going to have to replace that. And then take a look at this head bolt. The bottom end of that is still down there in the block. So I have that much thread, that's plenty. But this one's definitely going to have to go back in the same spot. Okay, it goes without saying that this head's heavy. And anything I bump into is going to be destroyed. So I got to be careful. I've already broke the shroud. I was carrying a head from a V8 and I walked into the mechanism for the garage door. It was the spring type on a hinge, and I literally skinned about 3 inches of my arm right here. So with that in mind, I still got the bolt in the back that I got to worry about. Let's see if I can get it out of here. Ooh. 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 All right, there's the last head bolt. Let's see, what do we get caught on? Okay, this thing was running pretty good except for the overheat. We're not going to worry about anything we observe in these cylinders. Okay, we got this head sitting on its machined surface. That's not really very good practice. So be cognizant that that's where the machine shop takes 30 thousandths off it. You don't want to scratch that up. I'm going to put some rags down and we'll pop the freeze plug out. Boy, it's hard to see where this thing's breached. Must be that little hole right there. Can you believe that? Unreal, man. You talk about a bummer. Little pinhole right there. All right, let's remove this and we'll call it a day today. Holy shit, the whole thing's corroded out. Look at that. Oh man. The method I was going to use to get it out is where you drive it in and it rotates in there. But did you see that? That just came up. That was like tin foil. Unbelievable. Let's try up here. Okay. That's not going to work either. Well, I got a tool that's for garlock seals. Let's try that. Now that's not working. Well, I was hoping to keep this for like a show and tell piece. But it looks like we're gonna have to just completely destroy this to get it out of here. Okay, somebody's going to tell you how easy these are to get out, right? This is so thin. The standard methods aren't working. What I'm going to have to do is cut this here somehow, either with a chisel or a Dremel. No, I'm not going to use a Dremel tool. I'll probably hit the head. And then just with some vice grips, twist it on out. There's where the pinhole was. Could you imagine trying to do this with this still installed? Man. Okay. We're gonna go back to my original. There it is. Damn, I wanted to keep this as show and tell. Oh well. That's called a bad break. Sometimes life feeds you a shit sandwich, and all you can do is put more mustard on it. We didn't even get a good souvenir out of this.